Thanks for tuning in to My Valley, His Victory, hosted by me, Mackenzie Smith, where I interview Christians who love the outdoors and have walked through valleys in their lives. In a world of highlight reels and surface-level relationships, we all have faced hardships. I believe our experiences can be encouraging to others if we have the courage to be vulnerable. 2 Corinthians 1 says, "The Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." My goal is to inspire you to come to the Creator through His creation and connect you with Christians who have been through similar experiences. I pray that this podcast encourages you if you are in a valley and pushes you to share how God has turned your past valley into His victory. Hey friends, I have a special announcement. I am hosting 2 The Wilderness and the Word events in 2025, July 23rd through 27th and August 13th through 17th. These are Christian women's retreats in Eureka, Montana, with Audrey from the Trail North. Our goal with these retreats is to bring together a group of women who want to worship the Creator in His creation. Over these 5 days, you'll meet like-minded women who want to grow in community, worship in the outdoors, and challenge themselves personally. I can't wait to hang out with you, so shoot me an email at myvalleyhisvictory@gmail.com for more information or the registration link. Spots are filling up, so make sure and reserve yours today. On today's episode of My Valley, His Victory, we have Amos Smith. Amos is originally from Florida, where he served as a youth pastor for 14 years before joining a nonprofit called a Christian Ministry in the National Parks. He spent a year living in Glacier National Park and Death Valley National Park, engaging in relational ministry with workers and guests. He then moved to the main office in Colorado to take on the role of program coordinator for ACMNP in 2022. He lives in Loveland, Colorado, and is married to his wife, Elizabeth. He is passionate about connecting people with Jesus in the beautiful places found in the national parks. His hobbies include hiking and playing board games with his friends. Thanks so much for being with us today, Amos.
Yeah, thanks for letting me be a part of this. This is a really cool experience, really cool opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know I just read your bio, but why don't you go ahead and just share a little bit more with our listeners about who you are?
Yeah, born and raised in Florida, so a Florida boy, which as we get through this conversation is going to be kind of ironic because of the kind of work I do working with the national parks. In Florida, you don't really spend a lot of time outside if you can avoid it because it's so hot, so humid most of the year. Camping's kind of out of the picture for most people. So I grew up just kind of a, homebody kind of a person. Grew up not really engaging in the outdoors. But I love people. I love Jesus. And that was something I was passionate about even in high school. And started in high school doing youth ministry type things, like leading the youth group on trips and things like that, even while I was still in high school, just because my church didn't have a youth pastor. Went to a ministry school, Florida Christian College in Orlando, and studied ministry. And during that whole time, I was doing part-time youth ministry. And after I graduated, I worked for the college, but I was also doing, volunteer work with youth ministry. So I just love working with students. Eventually just became a part-time youth pastor, then a full-time youth pastor over the years there in Orlando, Florida. Just love that experience. And I think for me, the key aspect that I enjoyed the most about that was the life-to-life discipleship aspect of youth ministry. But where I really saw it have a deep impact was anytime I took my students on some type of trip or retreat, we'd go to a conference or go to a camp or whatever it was. And I saw like how powerful getting away from the normal and getting in somewhere else, whatever that different context was, especially taking a group of students from Orlando, Florida up to like Tennessee and seeing like, the Smoky Mountains, all their minds are blown. And I was just like, okay, there's something powerful about getting away from normal, getting away from, the city life and stepping out into nature. That's something about that triggers inside of people's brains. So I love that aspect of student ministry the most. But yeah, so that was kind of the youth pastor years of my life. Loved doing that, enjoyed it. And kind of life took a huge turn in 2020 and COVID, because obviously COVID happened. I had some crazy life stuff we'll get into later that happened to me. And then through that whole year, just everything got flipped upside down. My life just kind of, hit this roadblock, and I really had to kind of start over with, who I am as a person and who God is calling me to be. And in the midst of that, I went on a vacation, just a personal vacation towards the end of COVID when we could travel again. And I visited Zion National Park and Bryce Canyon National Park for the first time. And I was totally blown away. I was just blown away by what I was seeing. And God spoke to me in a really deep way during that experience. And literally just a couple days after I got back from that trip, I talked to one of my old professors from college and just telling him, like, oh, man, you should go to Zion. It's so cool. It's really awesome. You got to get out of Florida. And he was like, you know what, Amos, you love ministry. You love student ministry. And apparently now you got some type of love for the outdoors. I heard about this organization, this nonprofit called a Christian Ministry in the National Parks. You should check it out. And, a light bulb went off for me. And I was like, all right, Christian ministry in the national parks. Is that even a thing? Do people do that? That's nuts. And I checked it out, looked it up, and I was like, this is legit. This is a real thing. And through some wrestling and praying and considering, should I do this? Should I leave Florida? Should I leave what I've known? Should I do something crazy? And I had a friend that basically just said, you know what, Amos, just try. Apply for it. If you get in, that's what God wants. If not, then stay here in Florida. And so I was like, all right, I guess this is a win-win either way. And God opened the door, and I ended up getting into the program and saw that I resigned from my full-time job, packed up my car, sold off everything else, and drove from Orlando, Florida, a long road trip, visiting a lot of places along the way, but ended up in Glacier National Park and was there for the whole summer of 2021. Loved it so much, I re-upped. And then in November, I went to Death Valley National Park, and I lived there until April. And in that process, the organization that I was with, and we'll talk more about what that looks like, but they essentially said, hey, we have a full-time position in Denver. Do you want to take that position? So I applied for that, got accepted. So I left Death Valley and literally drove straight to Colorado and started the next day in the full-time position as program coordinator.
Wow. What a wild journey. And it's interesting that you have such a love for the outdoors, not being someone who grew up in the outdoors. But I think that you saw, you noticed, I'll say not saw, you noticed that spark and that change. And whenever you changed environments with the people that you were doing ministry with, and I think there is so much value in that. And there's a reason why outdoor ministry is so powerful and so life-changing. Not to say that those things can't happen inside of a church, but there is something really powerful. And I've seen it, like you've seen it, that whenever you get out of your comfort zone, whenever you get into a new place, whenever you get into a place that maybe is a little bit uncomfortable, some things start to stir up. And so I think that's just amazing that you noticed that and then kind of took action on that, and capitalize is not the right word, but capitalize on that in a way. So how many national parks have you been to now at this point?
At this point, this year I hit 42 national parks.
Okay. Have you been to the ones in Florida?
I've been to all but the dried tortugas.
Okay.
Just because that's a beast to try to get to.
Yeah, you got to take a plane or take a ferry.
Yeah.
So which one is your favorite if you had to choose?
Favorite national park, I would say, of all time, I'd say Glacier National Park. It's a little unfair because I got to live there for 3.5 months. So, I really got to experience it and see it. But still, it's just outrageous. It's so incredible.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely a special place. So talk to us a little bit about this ministry in national parks and what you guys do. Because I know I was just like you. Whenever I found it on Instagram, I was like, this is a thing? Yeah. How did I not know about this? Why did I not know about this sooner? I would have totally went and worked, and sign me up. This is, kind of like you, a culmination of the outdoors and national parks and ministry, so much goodness in that. So talk to us about what y'all do.
Yeah. So the organization has been around since 1951. So that's 72 years, 73 years. It started with a group of seminary students from Princeton, and they had the summer off, so they went to Yellowstone National Park to work. There's opportunities for jobs, so they just went to work. But when they got there, they realized there's no church within 100 miles of here, and they were all Christians. So they were like, all right, I guess we're just going to do it. And so at the bar at the Old Faithful Inn on Sundays, they just started doing a worship service, and they invited, their other employees and any guests that happened to be in the park at the time. And it just became a thing. They just did it every week and loved it so much. They decided, hey, next summer, let's go do it again and bring some of our friends. And from there, it just kind of expanded. And one of those guys from that original group started a nonprofit after he graduated. And that's what he's been doing. That's what he started doing, was just recruiting people from different colleges to, hey, go spend your summer. And primarily it started with seminary students to, practice what does it look like to do ministry. But over the time, it's expanded to be pretty much anybody that follows Jesus can be a part of this program. And so the main branch of our program is what we call park life. And that's kind of what we've been describing so far is people find out, they apply, they go through the application process. And if they're accepted, then they get placed in a park. And so they go for either like a summer season or a winter season, whatever they're available for. And then we help partner them with the concessionaires that operate inside of the parks. So the companies that run all of the hotels and lodges and stores and restaurants and stuff, they need employees. And so we have a good relationship with those concessionaires. And so we get our applicants partnered with them, get them jobs there so that when they go to the park, they actually have a place to live. They have employee housing. They're on the food plan. So that's all taken care of. That allows them to live there for the whole season. They have a job, so they're making money, so they walk away. Usually a summer, they make $2,500 to $3,500 a summer, sometimes more, depending on the job. And while they're there, they get to do relational ministry, lived in day-to-day, life-to-life ministry with all of their coworkers, the other people that are living there all season long, and interacting with guests and building relationships there. And then we train them to actually provide a worship service on Sundays inside the national park. We reserve different campsite locations or amphitheaters for our groups to actually hold a worship service. So it's both kind of like a formal worship service kind of ministry, but mostly it's a relational, life-to-life discipleship kind of ministry. And the crazy part, and this is the part that I think people coming into the program struggle to see at first, is like, this is like real cross-cultural kind of ministry. You're going into a place where most of the people come from wildly different backgrounds, both American and around the world. And there's so many people that are running away from life, who are lost, who are hurting, who are broken, who break other things around them. And so a lot of times it's a really tough ministry because you're working with and talking with people that are extremely broken, extremely lost. So it's not a ministry for, the faint of heart, because, you've got to be there to like love people in dark places. And so that's why I loved it so much when I was there, was like, oh my gosh, like I went from working like in this kind of church safe bubble kind of thing. And then suddenly I was like thrust into the middle of like all the people. And I was just like, this is amazing. This is like the ministry that I've been longing for, because I don't have to try to convince people to come to this church building. I just get to be with them all the time and just love them like Jesus. And so many amazing conversations and interactions. And some people that were like, you're a Christian and I hate you because you're a Christian. And I was like, all right, cool. I'll love you anyway. And working to like reshape people's idea and people's story of who Jesus is, because so many people in the parks are coming from places of church hurt. So there's a ton of people that are like, oh, you're a Christian. That means you're a bigot and you hate me because I'm different. And then, me and my teams and all the teams that go out there have to like kind of reset that expectation by just loving them consistently over time. So amazing ministry, difficult ministry, not for the faint of heart. It's not an easy thing to do, but the really cool element that's kind of mixed into all of it is where we get to do this ministry. Living in a national park, living in some of the most beautiful places in the world. And like when I was in Glacier, I worked at Swift Current Inn, which is in the Mini Glacier Valley on the east side of the park. So look it up, Google it, Mini Glacier Valley in Glacier National Park. I got to wake up to paradise every single day. I'd go work in the camp store, do my 8 hours, I'd clock out, and then I'd look around and grab some people and say, hey, you want to go on a hike? You want to go on a hike? We'd go change and go do a 10-mile hike almost every day. Like, it was incredible.
Yeah. So is this ministry active in all the national parks?
Great question. And the answer is no. And, you and your listeners probably know that there's a wide range of national parks and types of national parks and accessibility of national parks. So we're actually probably only in about 25 to 30 parks a year, because those are the ones that have the jobs, that have the concessionaires, that have the infrastructure. Some parks are so remote or so small that there's no opportunity for a job there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. I figured it wasn't in totality of the national parks, but you never know.
That's a great question.
I'm learning too. So you've talked about your experience in the outdoors and, taking youth ministry and kind of serving in ministry in these national parks, but let's take the ministry away. What's your thing in the outdoors? Are you a hiker? Are you a backpacker? Are you a mountain biker? Kind of what's your thing that you do to get out and kind of, enjoy?
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could say I'm pretty simple. I just like to hike. I learned a long time ago that I struggle with any sort of athletics that, requires too much hand-eye coordination or too much lateral movement. So if it's a straight line and I can move forward, I'm pretty good. So yeah, so I love to hike. That's part of my thing. And obviously the reason being is just like, the physical challenge is great, but it's what you get to feel, sense, see, and experience along the way. I mean, some of the most profound conversations with God have happened when I'm just walking along a trail, because for me, the way my brain thinks, I'm always thinking in like pictures and images and analogies. And so when I'm walking in the outdoors, it's like God is constantly showing me things. Hey, your life is like this, or this situation is like this thing over here. And like the connections are so easy for me to see in that setting, that I feel deeply connected to God. And so that's what I love, is being able to be there, see it, experience it, but really, take in like, all right, God, what is it that I need to hear or understand from you based on what I'm seeing and experiencing right now?
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. I think we think a lot alike, because I'm the same way. I get out in nature and I'm like, see this, river running, and somehow like God's like kind of speaking to me through just seeing that. And it's usually I see something and it's like you said, an analogy for my life and what I'm dealing with. And it's like such cool pictures and imagery of just lessons that I feel like he's trying to teach us. And so I think that's really cool. Do you mind sharing a story or maybe a specific instance in a way in which God has revealed himself or spoken to you through being in the outdoors?
Yeah, man. Wow. There's a number of different ones. I think one that comes to my mind is while I was living in Glacier National Park, myself and two of my teammates, Quinn and Molly, one day had an afternoon free. We were all off work at the same time. So like, hey, let's go do this hike. There's a hike nearby that none of us have done yet. So let's go check it out. It's a place called Appoquinnie Falls. So, we hiked down. It was maybe like 2 miles away from where we lived and worked. So it wasn't too far away. So we hiked to the trailhead, and then you hike uphill and you're going through the woods, and it's just really beautiful. And it gets to a waterfall. And I mean, not a huge, massive waterfall, but it's really tall. So it's just like cascading down. It's just really pretty, really beautiful. And so we're getting close to the water, taking some pictures, having a good time. And then Quinn's like, hey, this steep cliff right next to us, let's climb up the top of that. And I'm like, that's dangerous. Let's go. And so we start scrambling up like this loose rock. I mean, super, super steep, and, just trying to keep our balance and scrambling all the way up. And we get up there, up on this high ledge. I'm almost equal with where the waterfall starts. And, we're looking down, and immediately after we look down, we see that there's a goat trail that we could have followed if we had just backed up a few steps, but whatever is what it is. So we get up there, and we come around, we find this ledge, and I mean, you're just looking out at the valley, and it's incredible. It's just so beautiful, so green. The lake is there. You're up high. You have the mountains all around you. You're looking out the valley. I set up my camera so we could get some cool pictures and all the fun stuff. But we're sitting there on the edge, and literally our feet are hanging over the edge, and we're just all sitting there. And as we're sitting there, suddenly I had this sense from God, and I'm just kind of listening, and God's like, do you remember what you prayed 5 years ago? And I was like, I just got kind of what the heck? Why did I think about that? And so I like just kind of processed and thought and tried to remember it. And then it hit me. And I remember like 5 years previous, I was visiting my parents' house on a weekend to see them. And I was out on their patio and I was praying and journaling. And I remember in that moment having an honest prayer with God and just asking him 5 years ago, God, if it's possible, can I live a life where I get to be in beautiful places with incredible people and have that as a career? And I prayed it one time and kind of put it away and just thought, it's never going to happen. And I remembered that moment, and I'm sitting there looking out at this valley, and I'm seeing my friend sitting next to me, and God says, "You're welcome." And it's just like this, like the love that God has, where you could pray one prayer and just think like, yeah, it's nothing, it's no big deal. But God's like, that's a big deal to me. And your life is interesting enough for me to do that kind of thing.
Yeah. Wow. It makes me think about just, all the prayers that I've maybe only prayed once, that I'm just like, God wasn't listening, or, I didn't have the faith to continue praying, the same thing, or that was just a season of my life where I prayed for, a certain thing. And it's like, no, I think God knows the desires of our hearts, and like also knows why he has put those certain things in our lives. And, it's interesting that there are so many iterations, kind of the same thing, where it's like you maybe had this thought of wanting to do that, but you didn't even have an idea of what that was going to look like. It was just like, I just want to be in the outdoors with beautiful people, And then it's like he's taken that tiny little seed and blossomed it into this amazing thing that was probably beyond comprehension of what that prayer even meant, or that you even had the idea for in your mind at that time. And so
that exactly, it was like all season long, I just kept saying to God, I was like, I just had these moments of like, you knew what I wanted before I knew I wanted it.
Yeah, that's so good. I'm thinking about my own personal life, and just, I remember 7 years ago, before I was even a Christian, like I had an idea to want to do a retreat, like to host retreats. And now, I've shared with you that, me and my friend Audrey are doing those, but it was like that want to do retreats wasn't even like the final plan. It was just like that tiny little seed of like, that is something that might be in the future. And now God has worked through so many different seasons of what that would even look like. And that was even before I was a Christian, like, And so, yeah, that's wild to think about, and wild to think about the prayers that we asked just even one time. Like, God hears. If that's not proof enough that God hears, then man, thank you so much for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that you live in Denver, Colorado, or, kind of that general area. So you live in a really beautiful place, easy access to the mountains, and some really, really amazing hikes and outdoor activities. But I know you also grew up in Florida, and you said you didn't spend a lot of time outside. So for someone who maybe lives in a place like Florida, what are some practical ways that they can start connecting with God through nature on an everyday basis without being in these super grand outdoorsy places?
Yeah, I think thinking through it, it's recognizing and understanding, what are the specific beauties that exist in your area. Like in Florida, you ain't looking for mountains. That ain't going to happen. I think the highest point in Florida is like 287 feet above sea level. So it's not going to be the grand mountains or valleys, but for a lot of people, it's something like the beach, going to the vastness of the ocean. Or for me, I wasn't much of a beach person, but I did love going to like the natural springs that are all over Florida, and particularly to see the diverse wildlife. And that's a unique thing that Florida has that a lot of other states in the nation don't, is, you have all sorts of types of birds that exist in Florida that don't exist anywhere else. You got alligators, you got snakes, you got all sorts of just wild, crazy animals that are actually pretty easy to see and find and experience. And so understanding like what is the beauty of your place? What is the beauty that's there? Recognizing what that is, and then taking time to rest in that. And I think that's a key thing, because with all of us, no matter where we're at, no matter where we grow up, you can always become normalized to beauty. And it's easy to just say, oh, the ocean's always there, or, oh, the mountains are always there. And you just kind of like forget about it. And then, so putting yourself in a position to stop and actually observe and look and see. And I think the practice that has helped me the most is, anywhere I'm at in the outdoors, is taking a moment, taking a deep breath, looking around and observing and seeing, what is all of what I'm seeing showing me and teaching me about myself and about God and about others and relationships? What am I seeing and observing there? But I think the step further is looking at something, if you're looking at like a mountain, if you're looking at the ocean, if you're looking at, beautiful field, whatever it is, and stopping and recognizing like there's detail here. If I'm willing to look at it, I could stare at a small little section and just keep looking and keep seeing more and more detail and more detail. And then I realized I could stand here all day and keep seeing one section after another, just keep seeing more detail. And I could stand here for weeks and still see new details. And then stopping and realizing that what I'm looking at, this outdoor, beautiful, intricate, detailed beauty, is a perfect analogy for another human being. That if I can see another person and recognize that there's intricacy, there's depth, there's so much there, then I can understand that God sees so much in them and so much in me that most of us just glance by and get normalized to and forget about. And so the practice of observing and looking at beauty in nature teaches us, or teaches me at least, to stop and look at the intricacy and the detailed beauty in other people too.
That's so good. I have never thought about it like that. And that's so valuable, because I think so often we don't give people the benefit of the doubt, and we're very quick to make judgments and very quick to not see the beauty in other human beings. And wow, I know that's convicting for me. That's something to chew on for sure. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. That's really helpful. And it's just so true. Like there's so much detail and so much depth to everything if we just take the time to see it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the problem. It's just so often we don't take the time. We're like, oh, we don't like what you're doing, so we'll just move on. And that's helpful. So switching gears into the title of this podcast, My Valley, His Victory, would love for you to share a valley or a season of wilderness that you experienced and just what God maybe taught you or prepared you for in that season.
Yeah, no, that's good. Kind of rewinding on the story I told at the beginning. So I went to the ministry school, doing youth pastor work. After a little while after I graduated, I got married. And was married for about 7 years. And it was in 2020, early 2020, February, when my wife at the time decided that she was done with our relationship, that she was done with the church, she was done with Jesus, she was kind of done with all of it. And she had her own stuff that she was working through. And despite, a long season of trying to make it work and trying to get help and counseling, it just wasn't going to happen. And so February 29th of 2020, she moved out and decided to leave. And so suddenly I was alone. And then, it was just, a couple of weeks later that the whole world shut down for COVID. And so I found myself at this just really dark, empty space where I was literally trapped at home, staring at walls, trying to contemplate, like, who am I? What's going on? What is my life? What is happening? God, why did you let this happen? Why didn't you save this marriage? Why didn't you change her or change me or change both of us to make it work? why do I have to go through this? So yeah, literally just sitting there and staring at walls and just wondering what in the world do I even do with myself, with my life. So it got down to like, the bottom level where all I could manage to do each day to keep sane was to, make my bed in the morning and, put a puzzle together. Like that was all I did for like the first like month and a half, was just super simple things just to have some degree of like control. I'm very fortunate that I had really good friends and mentors in my life at the time, that, consistently encouraged me and prayed for me. And one of my friends, one of my mentors, he kind of came into that season of life with me and said, "Hey, how about we try to reset life? How about we try to like rethink life? Do you want to go through a process of kind of reevaluating and figuring out what's next?" And that was a lifeline that I needed. I needed something. I needed some type of goal because just felt like I was just aimless and empty. And so he and I just started meeting once a week over Zoom, phone calls, that kind of thing during COVID. And he just had me go through this process of, looking at my life as a big picture. So it was kind of like life coaching kind of a thing. And so, where'd you come from? What are the big moments, the weak moments? Where are you strong? Where are you weak? Just kind of analyzing and looking at everything. It was a great like digging deep process, which really led me to a lot of journaling and talking to God through journaling. And so I started waking up every morning, getting a cup of coffee and sitting and just journaling for hours. I mean, I went through, in 9 months, I went through like 12 journals. Like I was just, I had to get everything out. And so God was constantly speaking into my life and pointing out like, hey, this is a broken area of your life. This is a broken area of your life. So it was like the really painful part of like, any type of health where, you got to get better, but you got to get worse. You got to go through a lot of pain first before you can actually get better. We got to get all the infection out before we can actually like wrap this up and heal this. So it was a lot of that kind of stuff. And it really kind of reset my life on trusting in God and just like, I don't know how this is all going to pan out. I don't know where this is all going to go, but I'm just going to trust you, God, when I can't see how this is all going to work. All I see and all I feel is emptiness and despair, but I'm just going to trust you in the midst of despair. And so just staying consistent with, journaling, staying consistent with praying, staying consistent with this life coaching practices that I was putting in, and just little increment by increment by increment, God really started to kind of like reshape my thinking and showing me like brokenness and then teaching me that he's there to heal that brokenness and all these different layers of that. And it was in the midst of all that. So it was like summer of, 2020 at this point. My life coach, Steve, he was like, "Hey, I want you to do something. I want you," and this was the weird part, and it plays into the story later on. He's like, "I want you to come up with some different adventures that you want to experience in your life, different types of adventures." So he's like, "One of them, I want you to do like, what's an immediate, a big thing that you can do in the next 6 months that's challenging, that's hard, that's difficult, that's going to cost you something, but it's something that can be happen in the next 6 months. And I want you also to think about, what's an adventure that you want to have that's, with and for other people? What would that look like? And then ultimately, I want you to come up with what is like a big, like pie in the sky, like ridiculous, like life goal kind of thing that, it's probably never going to happen, but, this is what you would love to see happen. And I want you to think through these things and write these things down." So I wrote down, for the short-term one, I wrote down like, I have some friends that live in Arizona. I'm going to go visit them, spend time with them. They do ministry with the Navajo people. So I'm going to just partner with them and just see how that goes for a week or so and experience that. And so a few months later, in September of 2020, I flew out to Arizona and spent time with them. And it was during that trip that I actually added on some extra days and went to Zion and Bryce. So it was kind of cool how that experience happened. The adventure to have with and for other people was like, I want to be in amazing places with awesome people. I want to love people and disciple people well. And I want to just do that in just really different kinds of settings. And then the kind of the pie in the sky, the ridiculous one was I wrote down, I said, I want to ultimately disciple people in the context of traveling and retreating with people. and do that in beautiful places. So those are the things I wrote down. So like I said, I went to Arizona, I went to Zion and Bryce, and I had the most profound moment with God that I've ever had in my life. I sat by the river in the Narrows there in Zion. It was just contemplating life, asking those big questions. God, why me? What's going on? Why has all this had to happen? What am I supposed to do? Who am I? Like all that kind of big existential kind of questions. In the midst of that, God spoke to me and he was just like, stop. Look around. What do you see? And so I stopped and I looked and I saw the river, the trees, the rocks, the canyon walls all around me. And he said, all of these things are being what they are. Just be. You have the freedom to just be you. And, it floored me. I was just like, oh my gosh. Wow, I've been scrambling around trying to do everything, and God's speaking to me and telling me just to be this, be who I am. I left the park that night. The next day I went to Bryce Canyon, explored Bryce Canyon, stayed there past sunset. And when I was done, I was driving back to my hotel, and I just had this urge to look at the stars because I lived in Orlando for so long. I hadn't seen many stars. So I drove off of the side road, got out and stood up and looked out. And for the first time in my life, with my own eyes, I saw the Milky Way. And I was just floored. I was just like, this is incredible. This is beautiful. And I was there for 15 minutes or so. And I was like, all right, I need to get back. So I get back on my car. And right when I turned my car on, I heard God speak to me and say, stop. Get out of the car. You're not done yet. So I turn the car off. I get out, standing there in the darkness, and I'm just kind of waiting. And God says, you have more you need to say to me. And so I was like, all right. So I just started talking out loud in the darkness, just talking about life, talking about everything that had happened with my wife leaving and all of those types of things. And as I talked, my talking became shouting, and my shouting became yelling, and my yelling became screaming. And it to the point, if you had walked up, you would have seen this crazy man in the darkness screaming at the top of his lungs. And it essentially was just all of my frustration, all of my hurt, all of my rage, all of everything that I had experienced, and all the hurt in ultimately asking that question, why? Why did this all happen? And at the kind of the crescendo of all of my shouting and screaming and frustration, anger and rage, right at that moment, God says to me, stop. Now look up. So I looked up and I saw all the stars. And he just says, just be. So in that moment, he didn't answer my questions, but he gave me the stars to look at. And so I stood there, and I don't know if it was 10 minutes or 2 hours. I don't know. I have no concept of time at that moment. And so I just stared at the stars. And then after whatever amount of time it was, God finally said to me, he's like, all right, you're done. You can go home now. Like, all right. So I get back in the car, drive back, fly home. And like I said, 2 days later, I talked to my friend about this experience, and he's like, you should check out this Christian ministry in the national park thing. This door gets blown wide open. And it's incredible. And kind of another piece of this story, if I can continue on, is as I was processing, applying for this, like I said, a friend encouraged me to do so. So I applied for the organization. And January of 21, actually on my birthday, I got the acceptance letter that says, hey, you're part of this ministry now. And suddenly I was like, oh my gosh, I'm actually doing this. This is insane. This is crazy. What am I thinking? I have a salary job. I'm working. I've got a place. What in the world? What do you mean I started to panic. I had a panic attack that day. I was like, this is nuts. I'm actually doing this. Like, how can I actually do this? And I sat down with my friend Gyro, and I was just telling him, like, I don't know, maybe I overstepped. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I should back off of this. And he spoke to me, and he just like encouraged me. He's like, hey, listen, God opened this door, so you just need to trust God with this. And I was like, okay. I'm still anxious and kind of freaked out a little bit. And I go home that night. I go to bed, and I have a dream. And listen, I know people have different perspectives on dreams, and most of my dreams I don't remember, but this dream I remembered. And in this dream, it's kind of like when you're in a dream, you kind of automatically know where you're at. And in this dream, I knew that I was standing in Glacier National Park, where I'd been assigned to go. But I've never seen Glacier. I'd never even seen a picture of Glacier at this point. But I knew in my dream that I was standing there. I was standing in this beautiful field surrounded by all these incredibly huge trees, and beyond them, all these mountains. And oddly enough, in my dream, these mountains were saying my name over and over and over again. And I immediately wake up in the middle of the night and I'm crying. And I'm like, all right, God, you win. I'm in. You got me. And that was enough for me to like just go full in. So committed to going, sold off everything. Like I said, traveled, did all the stuff, got to Glacier, was just having the absolute best season of my life. And towards the end of the season, me and some friends did this one hike called Gunsight Pass. It's 21 miles over the Continental Divide. And we were having an amazing time, and incredible hike, most beautiful place I've ever seen. And about 2/3 of the way through, we stop, we get some food, and we continue on. And after we leave that spot, we come down the hill, come around the bend, and immediately I'm standing in the exact same place I saw in my dream. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, all right, God, you've got this all figured out. You know what's going on. You got this plan. And here's kind of the weird thing. Like in my dream, the mountains were literally calling and I had to go. I had never heard that quote ever before. Because like in Florida, like nobody says that. Nobody's around that. So I never heard that quote. It wasn't until I got to Glacier and I got my job working in the camp store. They had a big poster of that. And I was like, how did they know? Not having any clue that this was a famous quote. Yeah. I just had a dream where the mountains were literally calling me. And so all of that happens. And like I said, I went to Death Valley National Park, experienced that. And halfway through that season, the organization calls me and says, hey, we want you to apply for this program director. And the main piece of what you're going to be doing is actually taking people on retreats into the national parks, which was that third huge adventure that I wrote down. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me? Like God is lining up the very thing that I had hoped to have. And so all of those things to say is that I went through horrible pain that I hope nobody ever has to experience, but God is faithful and good through all of that. After I got to Colorado, when I was done with Death Valley, started this program coordinator job. And a few months later, I actually started dating Elizabeth. And about a year later, we got married. And so I'm married. I'm married to an amazing woman. She works at the church that we go to. She loves the Lord. And she's just an incredible piece of my life. And I can't imagine being with anybody else now. And so it's just like this thing of like, I went through a lot of pain, but I wouldn't trade it for anything because of what God brought out of that and brought into my life, the beauty I got to experience, the adventures I got to go on, and then ultimately being with my wife now. It's this story of just, so I have this faith in God that it's like, I don't stress out nearly as much about stuff anymore because it's just like, God really has a plan and he's really working it and he actually cares about us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all that and walking us through that season. And just, man, God is so good and he's so gracious and he will restore, the brokenness. Like, I think we hear those things so often and it's like, no, like he's still doing it now. And it's so wild to me, the correlation of our desires and our wants. And in submission to God, like he works those things out somehow, and they're not always, what we had imagined, but there's a reason that's, some of these things are on our hearts. And I think it's so cool that your friend, told you to write it down, and now you've been able to see those things come to fruition, and you can look back and, have those things written down and be like, God answered, that, and that. And he didn't have to, those were just like your pie in the sky, dreams of like, well, this would be really cool. But, it doesn't have to happen. And I just think that's so cool. And I think that it's amazing how God has restored even, marriage for you and brought you, your beautiful bride now, and has had her fill some places that your ex-wife, was not, in loving and serving the Lord. And obviously that's really important and huge. And man, I just hear your story, and I'm just so encouraged. And yeah, it's just wild what God can do whenever we're faithful and prayerful and, truly kind of give it all to God and go through those hard wrestling, moments of screaming and yelling at God, because he wants it all. I think so often we just take it somewhere else, and it's like, no, like he wants to. But yeah, I'm just so encouraged by your story. I would love to ask you kind of a hot question of how being someone that has been divorced has either helped or hurt your ministry.
That's a great question. I've not seen how it has hurt any ministry that I've done. I think the experience has given me a deeper level of grace and understanding for people who experience that thing, divorce, whether it's, and what I guess I understood now is that it can come in so many different variations and types, where sometimes it's mutual, sometimes it's one-sided, sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's clean, sometimes it just has so many different layers to it. And so I have a much deeper understanding and love for anybody that's experiencing that same thing. And I've had the ability to have some deep conversations with people who are experiencing that from a place of understanding. So it's a painful thing, but again, the way I see it is like God does a good job of judo flipping all of our situations, that, we feel like they're all going to go one way, and then suddenly God can just flip them around to something else. And really, he doesn't waste anything. He doesn't waste any pain. He doesn't waste any bad experience. If we let him, and he can take even horrible things that have happened, painful things, and redeem those into ways to love and encourage other people. So for the most part, I would say that not a great experience for me, but it has allowed me to have a higher level of empathy and sympathy for people, and to have greater levels of conversation in the midst of difficult relationships, even beyond just divorce, just difficult relational issues.
Yeah. No, that's good. I just was curious because, I think sometimes, you were a youth pastor when all this was going down, and that, I think people forget that pastors and people in ministry are human, and that, the same things that happen to all of us can happen to those in ministry as well. And so I know that depending on the environment that you're around, it can either take away from your ministry or it can help build up your ministry. And so I was just curious what your experience was in that, because I think so often we just jump to they're in ministry, like their life should be perfect. And it's like, no, they're actually probably more being attacked by the enemy because they're in ministry. And so, Satan's doing everything that he can do to try to get them to stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Amos, for anyone who maybe is going through a similar season, I would love for you to just give them a word of encouragement or advice. I know that you said, in the middle of this, you couldn't see the plan, you couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe someone is in that exact same place. What would you leave them with?
Yeah. I think what I realized was God is not far away, and we have the choice to either stay close to him or not in difficult situations. And I did have that moment early on in the experience, the pain, where I was very tempted to go off the deep end and was even starting to lean towards that. And God reminded me and saying, you have a choice right now. You can do life your way and try to fix your problems. You can try to medicate, make the pain go away on your own terms and your own ways. And that will lead to more emptiness, pain, hurt, and brokenness for a longer period of time. Or you can come close to me and I will expose things and it will be painful. But this is the way that you can heal. And I thank God that he had that conversation with me and hit me with that. And that I had enough sense to say, all right, I'm in. And in the midst of pain, it's so much about consistency, so much about openness and honesty with yourself and with God. The temptation is to bury, to hide, to medicate, to buffer, to do all the stuff to get away from the pain, to make it go away, to fill the hole as quickly as possible. And that is not what you need to do. You really need to kind of traverse the river of misery in order to get to the other side. And the key piece of that is recognizing and knowing and believing that while you are in the river of misery, that's all you can feel. But Jesus is walking through the river with you. And you may not feel his goodness and his presence in the moment. And all you feel is the misery. Faith is knowing that he's there holding you up so that you're not swept away by it and leading you to the other side and out of that misery.
Yeah. I love that you emphasized feel there, because our feelings cannot always be true. And so I think it's so important in those seasons to not rely on the way that we're feeling.
Exactly.
So thank you. Thank you so much for that. So Amos, for somebody who wants to connect with you, learn more about the ministry that you're a part of, where can they find more about you or that?
Yeah, so the ministry is obviously a kind of a goofy long name. It literally is a Christian ministry in the national parks. The original guys weren't too original with the name, but at least it tells you exactly what it's all about. So if you Google that, a Christian ministry in the national parks, or our equally complicated acronym, ACMNP, you can find us online, find out more about the ministry and what we're doing. Also, you can look on Instagram. We have a great Instagram account with all sorts of great stuff. And so you can either look, there are two of them. So it's either ACMNP, or you can look up Park Life, which is connected to ACMNP. Park Life is a common term, so you might see several of those, but if it's connected to that acronym ACMNP, you'll find out more about what we're doing. You can see what our teams are up to in the parks, videos, content of what that looks like, of what that experience is like. And we'd love to be in touch with you, reach out, connect with you. If you're curious about maybe joining a team, being a park, doing that kind of ministry, we'd love that. We also do retreats. Impact trips is what we call them. So they're 3 to 7 day long trips. And I lead a lot of those, taking groups of people into the national parks, experiencing God in more of a short-term setting rather than a full season. So whether you want to do something for 3 to 6 months or you just want to do something for a weekend, we've got all sorts of opportunities. Would love to connect with you. Ultimately, to take people from their normal context into beautiful places for the purpose of connecting with Jesus.
Yeah. I love it. Well, y'all go check it out. And thank you again just so much, Amos, for being here and for sharing your story and for walking us through this hard season, but encouraging us that God is with us and that he is working it all out for his good.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for letting me be a part of this.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of My Valley, His Victory. If you or someone you know are interested in being on this podcast, please email myvalleyhisvictory@gmail.com.